You're listening to the Wired for Impact podcast. I would like to briefly share with people, though, how you discovered this, because in that video, you also show how you were going into court, you were dealing with a custody issue with your children through a divorce, and you kept essentially getting in trouble, getting yourself in jail, and all of a sudden you started acting a different way and you saw a very different response. Can you talk about that moment when the judge literally ran out of the room and what you did differently and what that aha moment was for you?
It started with, I was coming up against this thing and nothing was making sense. Like, why am I not winning these things? Because I have a really strong case and I could see it on the judges' faces and all that, but I was still being ruled against, similar to people who want to take the Constitution into the court, and they're going, you can't bring that in here. You're like, well, aren't we in the United States? Like, it was all that puzzling stuff. Like, what's going on in here? So I went to a seminar on commerce, and that's when the light bulb started going off, because I already had some experience and I had these anomalies that just didn't make sense. Now they started to make sense. It was like, oh, that's what's going on. Oh, that's why they did that. Oh, that's why that guy said that. It was like every hour I was getting more and more of these, oh, I see it now. And so I left there and tried to study what we could. We're still newbies, whoa. And not fully understanding everything. And that's another thing. You want to study, but you don't want to study to the point where you don't take action. You got to take action. I learned more by action than anything else. So I had these ongoing cases. By that time, I had the divorce child custody thing going. And I also had driving issues because as I was going through the rabbit holes, as you were describing earlier, I found out about the driver's license and the capitalized name and all this stuff. I rescinded my driver's license and wasn't doing the car insurance thing according to the rules here. And so I had two of those cases running at the same time. So in the driving one, I probably appeared 3 or 4 times over, 6-8 month period, maybe a year. It hadn't really gone to trial yet. They just, keep putting it off. So I did a commercial move according to commerce. And when we were going to my cases, we wouldn't go in the room until the judge was already in the room, because every time we went in ahead of time, they say, all rise, and we wouldn't stand up. And then there was all this, the sheriffs were, yeah. So we just stopped going in until the judge was in. Then you didn't have to bow or anything like that. So anyway, we were sitting out in the hall. My cases were usually called last because they just wanted to kind of clear the courtroom. So we were used to that. So, you have to show up at 9, but your case wouldn't really get called till like 2 or 3 or whatever in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. So a lot of sitting around, and we used to sit and, watch cases. I watched a lot of cases, but sometimes it was just like, I'm just going to sit out in the hall, chat or whatever. So anyway, we're out in the hall and they called the case inside the courtroom, and I wasn't in there because we were outside the door, just outside the door. And so they page it. If somebody doesn't come forward, then they page it into the whole courtroom, like everywhere. So in case you're in the bathroom or whatever, right? So I heard my name over the paging system. We're standing outside. And so, okay, gather up my papers and push on the door to go in. And as we're coming in the door, the judge is running off the bench, like just as if I came in with a gun.
That's different.
Way different than anything I experienced. Yeah, way different than anything I had experienced before. I'd never seen this behavior. And so we weren't.
And sorry, real quick, was this the first time that you walked in after All Rise?
Done that many times. This was the first time I had a commercial instrument based on commerce. The little bit that I learned at the seminar, we had just enough knowledge, but I didn't wait until I had all of the knowledge. I wanted to emphasize that. So we were experimenting. Let's just see if what this guy said is true.
So real quick, so you, instead of walking into the courtroom under the presumption that I am here to present my case and we're going to have the balance of justice examine this and have the judge, presume right or wrong or guilty or not guilty or whatever, you went into it with, Oh, I'm walking into a business. I'm walking into a corporation. Was that
No,
okay? Well,
no. So
I'm
this
trying to
is
understand
the
the exact
yeah.
difference.
So this is like when I went through all the rabbit holes and I learned about the capitalized name and all the, admiralty jurisdiction, all this stuff. I tried all that stuff. I tried, I'm not the name. You can't use my capitalized. I did all of that. I tried
Mm-hmm.
it all. I was
Mm-hmm.
willing to try anything to get out of this oppression that I was in. I was very oppressed for years. So this was just the next thing I was trying. Like, you got to understand that I wasn't who I am today. I am that because of what I did. So
Mm-hmm.
it was like, okay, this guy, we went to this thing. I had a lot of aha moments. A lot of things make sense. Let's just see if it works. Because I had a lot of aha moments on birth certificate and all that stuff too. But it was like, man, it wasn't working. I just got arrested. So this was literally, let's try this. The next thing on the list, basically. So we put a bond in on a case that was already running. I'd already appeared on it a couple of times. But this time, the guy ran out of the room.
So the
We didn't.
bond was the difference.
The bond was the difference.
Ah,
But what as I'm walking through the door, I don't know that.
right.
I
In
just see the guy
hindsight, you know
running
that.
off, and I'm like, well,
Right.
what's happening here?
Okay. Very
Because it
interesting.
looked like he had diarrhea or something. I got like I'm like he was booking it out of there,
Wow.
and everybody was looking at each other like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, in the courtroom, there, everybody's like, where'd the judge go? And so he's been gone for about 10 seconds or so, and then the sheriff stands up and goes, "All rise."
I guess. I guess
He
he's
was already
leaving.
gone.
Yeah.
Doors closed. Okay, all rise. So everybody gets up, and I guess we're taking a break. But there was no break called. They had just called my case, so there was no
Mm-hmm.
break happening. The guy
Mm-hmm.
ran out. We didn't put it together until later that night. I wonder if he ran off because of what we did.
Mm.
Because everything for me is just coincidence, right? So that's just how I roll. So we went, okay, that's a possibility. Maybe that's what has happened here.
Mm-hmm.
So let's try it again. So I had other cases. It started to become very clear that we were headed down the right path because all the judge behavior was just overwhelming. That we were hitting the mark.
So can we zoom out a little bit and just walk through? So you started operating at a higher jurisdiction. Is the bond okay? So what exactly was it about the bond that allowed you to supersede the jurisdiction that you were walking into in the courtroom?
I had unwittingly moved into law merchant. I didn't understand it, but I had moved up a jurisdiction and now I had insured the case, which means I kind of owned it.
Huh.
And everybody in there was now subject to the amount of money that was being thrown at this thing. You see, whoever has the money has the control in their system.
Right.
So I had stumbled onto this.
And so
And
was the judge liable then, potentially?
there was a potential liability, and he probably didn't even fully understand it, but he knew there was something about this, and his holdings were now on the line on this case, and he didn't want to sit there.
If I remember correctly from the video, weren't there other people in other positions in the local government or whatever that also left their job, or am I mixing that up with a different?
No, not on not on that particular day, but as we kept doing more and more commerce, and I got more and more knowledge, yeah, I saw people all at a federal level step down, provincial level. Many judges either recused themselves, retired, or wouldn't come in the room.
So I've been sort of dropping hints on my social media feeds where I'm letting people know you are much stronger than you realize. You are far more powerful than you realize. Some of that is coming from my spiritual beliefs, but I do think that there may be a connection to this. But anyway, you basically stumbled onto something where you were more powerful than you even realized. And you learned this from the merchant law course that you ended up taking. I love the part of the story where you were trying to do different things. And I think there was at one point where a judge, or maybe it was another attorney or somebody, pulled you aside and was like, keep going. You're on the right track. You got little clues along the way that they saw you trying to do different things, and you got some nudges that, yes, keep going in that direction. That's fascinating.
Yeah, I got nudges from two judges and probably about three 3 to 4 police officers.
And what was it that you learned in the merchant class that eventually became the epiphany that, oh, this is powerful?
Well, that it exists. There's this, and we weren't really saying law merchant back then. I don't think, but it was this commercial jurisdiction that wasn't admiralty. It was on the land. It's a land thing, and they stopped talking about it a long time ago, pretending it doesn't exist. So most lawyers will say it's a myth, or like, I don't know what you're talking about. Most of the judges had at least heard of it. So there was a discrepancy. So it's being hidden on purpose. Mm-hmm. Then they turned us all into merchants with the birth certificate. And so then merchant law applies, but we don't understand it. So when you were a merchant class in the Middle Ages, your signature could be turned into money. Put it that way. That's the simplest way to put it. So now, if they've turned us all into merchants and we don't understand that, every time we're signing a piece of paper, it could be turned into money. Not every time, but I mean, they're monetizing the fact that we're merchants, but we don't understand it. So we're signing stuff and they're getting the money from it, not us.
This, I'm sure we're losing some listeners right here who are scratching their heads going, what the hell are you guys talking about? Because this was me when I first heard this. As I understand it, historically, we had the Constitution, at least in America, was gold and silver was what was supposed to be used as the only legal tender to exchange goods and services. Then there came a point where we started to have promissory notes that essentially represented carrying around your gold was too cumbersome. You'd put it into a bank. They'd say, well, here's a piece of paper. Whenever you want, you can bring this paper back. You can get the gold back whenever you want. It's a promise. Here's a promissory note. Well, then we all started using the paper, and the paper became convenient, a lot easier to transport. You don't have to carry around wagons full of your gold and silver, which is heavy and cumbersome. You can have the paper. And then, and I know I'm skipping lots of history here, but eventually they detached the paper from the gold. And I think the other really big thing to note too is that paper is coming from a central bank, that we're borrowing that from somebody else. So the piece of paper in and of itself is an IOU back to those central bankers. So we all think we have value of this piece of paper when we're all just exchanging. We all owe it back to the puppet master. So what of value do we really have if we have this cash, right?
There is no value to it. It's complete fictitious, but it's more ancient than you think. That's the key to really understanding what's going on. Is this system predates the United States?
Mm-hmm. I mean, this is biblical, even like, isn't this?
I wouldn't say you don't see bills of exchange mentioned in the Bible, but it's from those times.
That's what I meant. Sorry,
yeah.
The so Roman times and.
Yeah, I mean, going back into Hammurabi times, like the ancient Babylon, they had commercial instruments in clay, and you had a roll, like a little cylinder that had engravings on it. That was your signature. You would literally roll in wet clay debt notes. And this is before they had money. They were still dealing in cattle and grain and actual commodities as far as trading. But when you wanted to represent it, they had it in clay. So they didn't even have money, but they had money concepts. So where did this come from?
So it's my understanding historically for America anyway, that in the 30s, when the government confiscated the gold, I had an epiphany the other day that at the time we normally think we might have heard of that term eminent domain. If you have a house and they want to build a highway, the government has the right to take the house for the greater good to build the highway, but they have to give you something of equal value, i.e. they're going to pay for your house at supposedly fair market value. So when the government confiscated the gold, my connecting the dots was, oh, if they took $10,000 worth of gold, they give you $10,000. Apples to apples exchange, equal value. And the epiphany that I had was that it wasn't that they just took the gold, they took away our entire ability to have legal tender according to the Constitution. And therefore they took away our ability to pay for anything in a way that was constitutional. And then it became our signature that eventually, because the country was bankrupt. I might be skipping around here. I might be messing this up. But
they think that was the third term of the bankruptcy from 1929 to 1999.
And so when the country went bankrupt, there was a meeting and the central bankers said, we'll lend you the money, but what do you have to offer as collateral? And what was proposed was the people. And so essentially at that point in time, we essentially became financial slaves to the system. And it's our signature that is the credit. Is that correct?
Yes.
So when we go in and when you, this is what just blows my mind and that people are discovering right now is that you literally can write on a piece of paper a promissory note. If I said I owe Cal $1 million and I signed my name, that is like handing you, if there was $1 million dollar bill, it's a promissory note. And people are literally taking that and depositing it and actually getting results with that. Or
I would say that's going to be spotty at best because the system is corrupt. That's how it should work. But in practicality, yes, some people are getting those results, others are not. So it's not cut and dry like that. It's not magic paper. But that said, you're correct that our signature is being monetized. So the banks are monetizing it. The clearest way to understand this is look up the definition of a bill of exchange. All it is a writing that has one person owes another person an exact amount of money on an exact date and a signature.
mm-hmm.
And the signature doesn't matter. It just has to have a signature. This is how they were creating money, the merchant class. And that's how the merchant class got rich. That's why the rich families are rich families, because they were doing this kind of money and the rest of us were scratching around trying to live indoors and eat. So
exchange our labor for it.
Exactly. But they had this whole system and they just didn't tell anybody. It wasn't for everybody. It was merchant class only. So around the 30s is when the birth certificates started to come out. Because like you said, how are we going to pay this back? And that's when the income tax act started to come out. And that's why you can't find any law that says pay income tax, because they're not really allowed to do it, but they have to pay the money back. They're in a catch-22. And so the judges are going along with this income tax thing because if they don't, we're going to run out of money. You got to understand that.
But how would we run out of money if they can just invent it?
Because the banking families have that control over it. The only place to get actual FRNs is at the Federal Reserve because they're called Federal Reserve notes. But that's a private bank. So if you want to have Federal Reserve notes, which everybody understands and will accept as payment, you've got to borrow them. The government has to borrow them from that institution.
Mm-hmm.
They print them out of nothing, and then they want it all back plus interest. And the way they get it back is through income tax. So if you want to have money in your economy, think about what happened just before the 30s.
I mean, the Great Depression.
Great Depression, because there was no money.
Mm-hmm.
They pulled the money supply back. Nobody could do anything. No, there were no jobs because there was no money to transact with. All you have to do is pull that all back and it shuts the whole thing down.
Mm-hmm. Again, when I first started hearing about this, I was like, it all sounds crazy. Like, I don't have time for that. And it wasn't until somebody showed me how to search my own social security number and see how much it's being traded on the global markets. And so you're literally looking at, and then that was the first thing that got me going, okay, like it seems like there's a little bit more there. And the more that I looked, the more that I found. The more questions you ask, the more you find that are unanswered, and it just completely opens this. And it does take a while to wrap your head around because it's intentionally, I think, convoluted and confusing, and they use certain words that you think mean some things, but they actually mean other things. And so it takes some mental energy to actually uncover and untangle all this stuff.
Exactly.
So we can go down the rabbit hole for probably multiple hours and just barely scratch the surface. But I do want to give people some real tangible. It's one thing to just talk about what might be perceived as semantics, or it's quite another thing when you're getting real results, when you're walking into a courtroom and you're seeing changed behavior. And can you give us the quick tie-up of that particular case so that people can see how that affected you? You weren't being thrown in jail anymore. It was quite a different experience. What was the outcome of that case when you started using the bonds?
Well, that case, I abated it because they couldn't answer certain questions, which they should be able to answer regarding Canadian Constitution. And so it went away. I stopped appearing on it. I said, I'm not coming unless you can answer these questions. And so about a year and a half later, maybe 2 years later, they came and arrested me at work. They took one more shot at it. I had only done the jail time I'd done up to that point, quite a few of them, but it was always just overnight. It was always like less than 24 hours. So they picked me up on a long weekend, knowing that I would have to stay at least 3 nights in an actual remand center, where you put on the prison clothes, and it's a dangerous place. I had not been in there before. So they thought they would take one more run at me. And so I was picked up, I was held without bail, and I was in that remand center, actually 2 remand centers, because of, my friends were bonding and they were flipping me back and forth. But anyway, I was in there for 60 days on this same case. Now that judge was long gone. He had long removed himself, and they had, every time I appeared, it was always a new judge. I'd maybe see a judge twice in a row, and then they had enough. And then they looked for a judge to actually do the actual trial. And so I got this lady, and we found out afterwards she had only been a judge for 3 months. And she was the newest judge in British Columbia. So she got it. She had to take it. And so at the end of it all, my charge was driving without insurance, even though I had bonded properly according to the act. They changed the act. But regardless, I had taken responsibility to indemnify myself on the roads, and wasn't causing anybody any harm. Well, they don't want this getting out, because then everybody will do it. It's a billion-dollar industry, huge money. Everybody has to go through our insurance thing. It's a provincial wide, and on average, back then, everybody was about $150 a month. It's probably closer to $200 to $300 a month now. And times how many cars are in the whole province, start to do the math on that. They did not want what I was doing.
Chain dry up. Yeah.
No, that is like so much money off of that. So I on the last day, my friends had put in a promissory note, which you had mentioned. So we were getting pretty adept at the commercial instruments by then. I learned more even after all this, but we were a lot more confident, because we were really not confident when we went down this road. We were actually very anxious about it, and in a lot of, well, I don't know about this. This is, these are big numbers. Are we going to have to pay this at some point? We went through all that. We overcame our own fears and stepped out and did this. So by this time, we were feeling pretty comfortable with it. We're getting the reactions, the judges are running, and all that kind of stuff. So my friends put in a habeas corpus and a promissory note, which then she found me guilty. And part of the sentencing was 1 day in jail, but I had already done 60. So she had to give me 59 days credit. So she said, I'm giving you 59 days credit, $1,200 fine, and a 5-year driving prohibition. I didn't want the driving prohibition because I had been in jail for 60 days, and I saw guys leave on conditions and then come back in. Within the 2 months I was there, I'm seeing guys go and come back. I'm like, this is a racket. Like, they're just keeping the beds full in here. And so they have these conditions, like you can't go, downtown Vancouver in certain area where all their friends are. They know they're going to go in there, and then they just pick them up again and bring them back. Because now they got, So I knew that I would not be able to drive for 5 years without being pulled over at least once. It's just not I can't do it. I was good at it, but I'm not, that's just. So I knew that I would be in this revolving door going in and out of jail for the rest of my life, really. So I said, I'm not accepting the 5-year driving prohibition. It's going to cause me harm. And the prosecutor's like, what do you, he was like, he'd never seen that before. Somebody negotiating the actual sentence.
Yeah.
And she goes, well, okay, I'll take it off. And the prosecutor's like, again, he's never seen this before. I said, that will cause me harm. And so she took that off. So now I'm left with 1 day in jail and a $1,200 fine and 59 days credit. I knew about the promissory note my friends had put in. So as soon as I heard the word credit, and I'd seen this credit before on somebody else, so it wasn't a surprise to me, but we didn't really know what it was. Another guy had gotten 14 days credit, and we're trying to figure out, like, what is this? Like, how do you get credit jail time? Does that mean you can punch somebody in for free? Or so we pondered it. We tried to find it in statutes, couldn't find anything on it. Like, it was just like, this is just weird. Like, how do you have credit? Jail time credit. Like, something's like, I've got this thing that I can use.
Like get out of literally a get out of jail.
Get out of jail for 14. Yeah. So it's like, this doesn't make any sense. Like,
Yeah.
he can do a crime up to 14 days and it's okay.
Right.
So we never did come to the bottom of it, but now I'm hearing it the second time. So it didn't go past me is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen it before. We didn't come to any conclusion on it. But when she said 59 days credit, I went, oh, there's that thing again. And I went, hang on, credit. There's a thing over here that would balance that credit because my friends put a promissory note in. So I went, hey, you just offered me 59 days credit. It has to equal that piece of paper over there that you guys took, that promissory note. And, we bantered back and forth. And then she goes, how much is the promissory note? And I said, 300 million. And she just like, whoa. And I could hear all the lawyers and, in the back, because they all were coming to my case because it was interesting to them. Right?
I'm sure it's very entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was always a full courtroom of mostly court staff. Like probably half the room would be lawyers and court staff and previous prosecutors. And I don't know if I saw a judge or a previous judge. I think they would have just watched on video or whatever, but definitely saw, prosecutors that I'd seen throughout the time. So they were all, and so I left there victorious. They owed me $300 million. That turned into another story where, I learned more commerce, just trying to collect that. Now we're at a whole other stage, and I learned a lot through that. So we tried a couple things. They ignored it. Then I went to another seminar, got this other document, like a template, that didn't really work, but we studied it intently, looked up all the words in the dictionary. That's another thing. You got to actually put the time in. There's no magic pieces of paper. So once we understood it and adapted it for what we were doing, I got it notarized at the U.S. consulate and sent it in, and it just about blew up the government. So now we're going, oh boy. And this is where politicians and et cetera started stepping down all the way up to the federal level. Jeez. So it was a thing that they were dragging me through, and I was just trying to get free of it. And I was trying things. And as we experimented, I started to stumble onto, oh, you're running from that. Okay, what's in there that we need to find out what it is. It was a learning experience by experiencing things, by trying things, watching the reaction, and then going, okay, if you guys are running, then there must be something in here that I need to know more about.
Yeah. Did this go all the way up to the Queen? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes. This all ended up, this whole thing, starting at a driving without insurance, ended up on the Queen's desk.
Talk about being more powerful than you realize.
Yeah. So this is the thing. And I wasn't out to get the Queen. I had no idea where this was going. I was just trying to get free of this monster, which I did. And then once I got free of the monster, and I didn't know I was free of the monster. And, when you leave jail, it's like, okay, am I going to get picked up again? I've never appeared in court since that time on my name. They dropped everything. So that worked, but that took time to it's been probably almost over 10 years now. So I've never brought into court.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Wired for Impact. If you're interested in creating and expanding your impact, be sure to visit us online at impactnow.com.